we will get into that. But when we're looking at prophecy, we must understand that a lot of prophecy is history. I know that doesn't kind of make sense to us, but you must understand that the prophecies in the Bible were written 2,000 to 2,500 years ago. So back in those days, it was prophecy. But most of the prophecies in the Bible have already been fulfilled. So today we look back on history. All right. So in these lessons of prophecy, we can also learn a lot about history. All right. So get geared up for that. It's not only looking forward to what's still coming, but a lot of the prophecies have already been fulfilled. All right. So let's start right at the top. The book of Daniel. Put up your hand if you've read the book of Daniel. Okay, good few of you. Second follow-up question. Who understood the book of Daniel? Not so many of you. Okay, great. The book of Daniel, the narrative of Daniel in exile in Babylon, gives us some interesting insight into Israel's restoration and God's dealing with Gentile nations. So first, above Babylon, you can write Iraq. Ancient Babylon is modern-day Iraq, the country of Iraq. The city of Babylon, the restored ruins, is actually just a few miles away from modern-day Baghdad. All right? So before we carry on, the book of Daniel, the context, the historical context is Nebuchadnezzar, the king of Babylon. He came from the east and he destroyed Jerusalem. He burnt down the walls, broke down the walls, burnt down the temple, and took some of those people living there and took them back to Babylon in exile. Many of the Jews there were taken back to Babylon. When Nebuchadnezzar, the Babylonian king, destroyed Jerusalem, he took young Hebrews of exceptional intelligence to serve in his government. One of these were Daniel. Who were the other three that is mentioned in the book of Daniel? Abednego, Shadrach. Okay, here's my follow-up question. What are their original Hebrew names? Do you know that Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego are not the original names? Those are Babylonian names. The original names are Hananiah, Azariah, and Mishael. All right. So that was their names when they got there. When they got to Babylon, Nebuchadnezzar said, well, that's not going to happen. Your names are all being changed. And those names, Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego, are all Babylonian names that honor Babylonian gods. Do you know that? They're like no way related to God whatsoever. All right, but it was Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego, and Daniel. Daniel, in the book, it's interesting that he retains his original name, Daniel. It's his Hebrew name. But in the book, he does tell us that his name was also changed. You know what his name was? Belshazzar. Yeah, well done. But in the book, he kind of refers to himself as Daniel. He does not refer to himself as Belshazzar. All right, so the young royal guys in Jerusalem were all taken in exile, and they actually served under King Nebuchadnezzar in his high courts. All right, the Old Testament is a record of Israel's history. Underline that part. It's very important to understand that the Old Testament in its entirety is the history of Israel from start to finish. Is Israel's history, and Gentile nations who engaged or oppressed Israel make up part of that history. So it's the history of Israel and also the countries and nations that actually conquered and oppressed them. For example, the Egyptians, who had the Hebrews as slaves, and then the Babylonians who took them into exile. It's still the history of the Jews, but just in a different place. All right. So the Old Testament is a record of Israel's history, and that's important, especially when it comes to prophecy, because prophecy is in the Old Testament, therefore also related to Israel. Okay, important. Daniel is to the Old Testament what Revelation is to the New Testament. Put up your hand if you've read the book of Revelation. Oh, some of you have. Follow-up question. Did you understand it? No, not really. Okay, so to understand Revelation, the book of Revelation, it will be good to first read and understand Daniel, because they deal with the same things and even the same symbols. All right, and so what that says is Daniel is a prophetical book in the Old Testament. It's kind of the same for Revelation in the New Testament. The book of Daniel written by Daniel, and the book of Revelation written by John the Apostle. Okay, both these books are apocalyptic and focus on the rise and fall of Gentile nations. You right there, Chris? And Israel's survival. as God's kingdom people. Apocalyptic, you can write maybe next to that in the anywhere on the white page, unveil. Apocalypse is the Greek word that means to unveil, and that is where we get the word revelation, to reveal. Okay. And the important part is that last part of the sentence, which says survival of God's kingdom people. Underneath God's kingdom people, right, Jews. The Jews are a kingdom of priests and kings, the chosen nation, the kingdom people, because the kingdom was promised to them and was postponed. And when Jesus returns, he will build his kingdom again for the Jews. He will then resume his initial title, which he should have got, which was the King of the Jews. All right. Currently, Jesus is not the King of the Jews. It's only when he sits on the rightful throne of David that he will be um, given that title. All right. Now we're going to look at the empires of the world. This is where we get to a bit of history. So these empires, it's mentioned 7 of them here. It's not all the empires in the world. It's the ones referring to Israel. Okay? So the first one that relates to Israel, remember we're talking only about biblical history, is the Egyptian Empire. This was in the time of Joseph, when Joseph went there, and then his family came down because of the famine, and then they were slaves for about 215 years. The next empire that took over and controlled Israel was the Assyrian Empire. And then after that, the Babylonians conquered the Syrians and also conquered Israel. Then the Medo-Persians, they conquered the Babylonians. Then after them, Alexander the Great became the first emperor of the Grecian Empire. And he ruled the Middle East. And then after that, his kingdom crumbled and the Roman Empire then rose to prominence. And then after that, we've got a 7th one, which is called the Revived European Empire. This one is not there yet, all right? The world empires with relation to Israel stopped at the Roman Empire. There's never been another empire in that land that has conquered Israel. All these empires we've mentioned, 1 to 6, have 2 very important things in common. They were all successive. One conquered the other, one conquered the other, one conquered the other. And 2, they all conquered Israel. All right? Very important. And these weren't the only empires in the world, because like in South America, there were the Aztecs, there was the Mongols in Asia, there was all these other empires. These ones are mentioned because they are in direct relation to Israel. They conquered Israel. All right, so there's 2 important things. I think you maybe even want to write that down. Successive, which means that they came one after the other, and they conquered Israel. And it's important because when we look through the prophecies of Daniel and Revelation, there's certain empires and nations and kings that always come into play, and some that never do. For example, South Africa is never mentioned in the prophecies of Daniel. America is never mentioned in the prophecies of Daniel. Antarctica is never mentioned. Right? So when it comes to prophecy, there are certain kingdoms and kings that are mentioned, and the others are not there. All right, and that's what we must keep in mind with regard to sensationalism. There is one more empire that I'd like you to add onto the list. Number 8. Antichrist kingdom. Bulk of the prophecies we're going to be talking about is going to be relating to and revolving around one particular person called the Antichrist. So we're going to write that now, just so you got the understanding that there is an 8th one, but we'll only get to that when we get to Revelation. All right? So currently, up to the 6th empire, the Roman Empire, that has all been done. That's fulfilled, historical. The one we're waiting for still is a revived European Empire, because after the Roman Empire, there's never been another successive empire that conquered Israel. All right? And then after that revived European Empire, the last one to come will be the Antichrist kingdom. He will come from that kingdom. All right? So just understand that when it comes to Revelation, there's actually like 8 Gentile empires. All right, so with that, now we're going to look at Nebuchadnezzar's dream. So let me give you context before we actually read this. Is probably from the King James and New King James. The context is the Jews are taken to Babylon, modern day Iraq, as exiles. And there the king, Nebuchadnezzar, has a dream. And he calls his astrologers and his magicians and all his wise people together and says, I want you to tell me what I dreamt and to tell me the interpretation of it. They tell him, well, listen, we don't really know what you dreamt. So you tell us what you dreamt and we'll give you the interpretation. He says, no, that's not what I asked. He said, you tell me what I dreamt and you give me the interpretation. And if you don't, I'm going to kill all of you. That's what he said. And then word got out, Daniel, who was also one of the hierarchy of these wise men, he heard about this and said, okay, well, listen, I've got to get involved here. And he prayed to God, and God gave him the dream and the interpretation. So Daniel comes to the king and says, King, don't kill anybody, just relax, take your Zolonox and your Xanox and all the other pills, and just calm down. And he says, I will tell you the dream, and I'll give you the interpretation. All right, so that's the context of what we're going to be reading right now. So if for those of you that you have not read Daniel or not read this interpretation of this dream, this will be new things for you. So I'm going to be trying to talk slowly and as best articulated as I can, because I understand that some people have never read and heard of these things before. So let's read at the bottom of the lesson, Daniel 2. We won't refer to the Bible, we'll read it on the lesson. It says this in Daniel chapter 2, 31 to 45. You, O king. So this is Daniel talking to the king of Babylon, King Nebuchadnezzar. You, O king, were watching, and behold a great image. This great image, whose splendor was excellent, stood before you, and his form was awesome. And while we're reading, you can have a quick look at that little picture on the right-hand side. You see that little image, that statue? That's kind of what we're going to be reading. He says, this image's head was of fine gold, its chest and arms of silver, its belly and thighs of bronze, its legs of iron, its feet partly of iron and partly of clay. So that's what the dream was. He saw this big statue of gold and silver and bronze and iron and clay. And then he says, you watched while a stone was cut without hands, which struck the image on its feet of iron and clay and broke it in pieces. So after the image, this like mountain rock comes and smashes the feet of this image and crushes it. And then the iron, the clay, the bronze, the silver, and the gold were crushed together and became like chaff from the summer threshing floor. You know, when they used to do the harvest, they used to put all the wheat on the threshing floor, and they used to take a pitchfork, throw it up into the air, and the wind used to blow all the chaff and the sediments away. All right. And it says, and the wind carried them away, that no trace of them was found. And the stone that struck the image became a great mountain and filled the whole earth. So he tells him, this is what you dreamed. This is the dream. Now we will tell you the interpretation of it before the king. The good thing about prophecy, most of the time, actually does interpret what the symbols are, which we don't really kind of understand sometimes. If you read that, you would think, what is going on here? But most of the time, in Daniel and Revelation, the prophets actually give the interpretation, which is great. All right. Not all of the interpretation, but it tells us what it is. So this is what he says. This is interpretation. You, O king, are the king of kings. For the God of heaven has given you a kingdom and power, strength and glory, and whatever the children of men dwell in, the beasts of the field and the birds of the heaven, he has given them into your hand, and he has made you ruler over all of them. You are this head of gold. So that's the starting point. He says, here's a statue, it's got a head of gold. You, King Nebuchadnezzar of Babylon, you represent the head of gold. So the head of gold of the statue represents the Babylonian kingdom. All right, are we on the same page so far? That's pretty important. After that, it's just a bit of semantics. All right, it says this, but after you shall rise another kingdom inferior to yours, then another, a third kingdom of bronze, which shall rule over all the earth. And a fourth kingdom shall be as strong as iron, inasmuch as iron breaks in pieces and shatters everything. Remember what I said about successive kingdoms? Babylonian. After that, he says, will come another kingdom after you. After that will come another kingdom after you. Successive kingdoms. So before we turn over the page, these four he mentions, at the time when he was writing this, he was living under the Babylonian rule. So he just said to the king, listen, after you, there's going to be another kingdom. I don't know what this kingdom is, but there's going to be another one. And after that, there's going to be another one. All right. We now are fortunate in 2025 to look back on history. All right. So we can look back on history and say, well, what happened after the Babylonian Empire? And history tells us what are those empires that actually succeeded the Babylonian Empire, which we'll get into shortly. All right, turn over the page. We'll continue reading the rest of the prophecy. So far it's pretty nice. He just gives the image. He says there's a head of gold, and we know the starting point. You of this empire. And then he says, whereas you saw the feet and the toes, this is the one that is a bit of the controversy, because the others are pretty well known in history, but the toes and the feet are not. He says, okay, these are successive empires that have come. Then he stops at the feet and the toes, and he puts a bit more emphasis on them. And he says this, whereas he saw the feet and toes, partly of potter's clay and partly of iron, the kingdom shall be divided. So it will be a united kingdom, but it will be divided. Some strength and some weaknesses. Yet the strength of the iron shall be in it, as he saw the iron mixed with ceramic clay. And the toes of the feet were partly of iron and partly of clay. So the kingdom shall be partly strong and partly fragile. All right? And you saw as you saw the iron mixed with the clay, they will mingle as the seeds of men, and they will not adhere to one another. They will not glue, lacquer, fuss with one another. There will be arguments and confrontation between the rulers of that kingdom, just as iron does not mix with clay. And in the days of these kings, underline these kings. So there's going to be a kingdom that will come after the Roman Empire, that will be a bit weak and a bit strong. And then it says, in the days of those kings, the God of heaven will set up a kingdom which shall never be destroyed. So at the time of those kings that we're just speaking about, that's when Jesus will come back and set up his kingdom and rule as the King of kings and the Lord of lords and the King of Israel. And the kingdom shall not be left to another people. It shall break in pieces and consume all the other kingdoms. God's kingdom will rule over all kingdoms of the earth, and it shall stand forever. Inasmuch as he saw that the stone was cut out of a mountain without hands, and it broke in pieces the iron, the bronze, the clay, the silver, and the gold, the great God has made known to the king what will come to pass after this. This dream is certain, and its interpretation sure. All right, so as I said, we look back on history. We know the empires that followed the Babylonian Empire. It's the last one that we are not sure about, the feet and the toes of iron and clay. Because it says that when those kings are formed, Jesus will return. And we know that Jesus hasn't returned yet. Therefore, we know that that kingdom has not yet come. All right, so let's turn back to the front page again quick. You see where it says empires of the world? We're going to start by number 3, Babylonian Empire, because that's what he said. You, O king, are the head of gold. After the Babylonian Empire came the Medo-Persian Empire. And then after that came the Grecian Empire. And then the fourth part of the statue, the legs of iron, was the Roman Empire. At the time, Daniel didn't know that. He was looking forward. We know that looking back in history. Right? We got history documents to prove that these empires existed and followed one another. So that's the empire as it stands, or the statue as it stands, until the Roman Empire. After the Roman Empire, there's never been another empire in that area that conquered Israel. So we are waiting for the final part of that statue, the feet and the toes of iron and clay. When that kingdom is set up, Jesus will return. That hasn't happened yet. So if you can look at that statue for what you can see of it, everything has been fulfilled until the feet. So if you want it with your pen, you can put an arrow there at the toes, or at the ankles at least. And that's where we are today. All right? We are living at the ankles of this statue. Everything has been fulfilled except for that last part. We are waiting very patiently for that last kingdom to come, the 7th one, and then after that, yay, Jesus comes back. All right, so that is the dream, and this, bless you, if that was a sneeze. So that is the dream. And remember what's important here also, this wasn't even Daniel's dream. It's not his prophecy. It's Nebuchadnezzar's, a Gentile king of Babylon. He had the dream. All Daniel done was interpreted for him. So the dream is of a statue. Didn't understand it. God gives the revelation to Daniel. He goes to the king and says, this is what this is about. All this dream is about the statue is about empires that will come after you. And now we know what they are. Babylon, Persia, Greek, Rome. All right. And that's where we are so far. So let's turn over the page again and we'll continue reading the rest of the lesson. It says understanding prophecy. They haven't established the prophecy relates to Israel's future, underline Israel's future. Because that's important. I don't want you to miss that because the prophecies in the Bible really have nothing to do with anybody else besides Israel. And we have to start understanding that. And her relevance in the unfolding global drama of nations. This lesson will help you to understand the apocalyptic character of the book of Daniel. And again, apocalyptic, don't think of doom and gloom. Think of unveiling. So it's the unveiling character of the book of Daniel. It's a beautiful book. Everything's there. Prophecies and interpretation of it. All we got to do is just read it. And it will make us so excited. All right. Instead of what we do nowadays, we look at a TikTok video about what somebody says about something, and sometimes it's not true. Most times it's not true. Okay, let's look at Nebuchadnezzar's image. Daniel 2 gives us an insight to the empires of the world and their relation to Israel. We've just spoken about it in the previous page. Empires 3, 4, and 5. Let me just check that again. 3, 4, 5, and 6. All right. So we just spoke about that in the previous page. And then we're going to again focus on the last part, which is the controversy and what and when. The feet and the toes of iron and clay. What is this? When will it happen? Did it happen? What are we waiting for? All right, it says the nations of iron and clay. The 10 toes of the image represent the 10 regions of Europe that were dominated by the old Roman Empire. The revival of Europe and the inability to establish a solid union was predicted in Daniel chapter 2. The iron and clay could not and will not form an alloy or a solid mass. They will not gel, lacquer together. All right, so this is what we want to focus on, is that last kingdom that has not come yet. As I said, after the Roman Empire, there's never been another empire after that. For those that don't know about history, the Roman Empire was conquered by the Vandal barbaric tribes of Germany. They came from the north of Europe and they conquered the Roman Empire. And from that time on, there's never been another empire that ruled in that area that conquered Israel. Never ever. Eventually, after that, the Roman Empire split up into what we know today as France, Italy, Portugal, Greece, and all these other countries. Right? And even still to today, there's no real empire there. But there is a unity in that area. There is a unity of countries in Europe. And that we call the European Union. Right. So not necessarily an empire, but a unity of kings or presidents in that area. All right, so keep that in mind as we look at the last part. It says material value. This just says it's significant that the world empires of gold, silver, bronze, and iron reflect the material value of the nations. As all kings would, it's materialistic, it's economically driven. And then the last part's the important part. This is what we kind of want to look at and maybe discuss and give me your view. It says the economic bloc. The EU, which is also called the European Union, you can put above that union part 1993, because that's when it was established. Was formed for economic reasons of trade and commerce, the political mixture of Europe and self-determination of the Europeans contribute to the continent's weakness. It's always difficult when you have like 28 countries driven by different presidents, all trying to agree on the same thing. It's very difficult, right? And we know that even in a church, between a church of 4 ministers, they can't agree with one another. So how much more difficult is it with like 28 presidents trying to agree? And I said, despite Brexit, the UK is part of the old regions of Europe. The UK was part of the EU, but is not part no more. So what we're going to do now is look at the map. So I want to show you the map. We're going to look at the two sides of the map. Let's first look at the yellow part, this part. And what it says is the Roman Empire. All right. So at this time, all these empires we just spoke about, Babylon, Syria, Greek, and Persia, are on this map. And I'll show you kind of where they are. You see where it says Mesopotamia. All right. That was Babylon. All right. So you can maybe write Babylon underneath there if you want. This is where the Babylonian Empire started. It wasn't that big, very strong, but not that big. They were really just around that area where it says Mesopotamia. After the Babylonians, they were conquered by the Persians. And the Persians are that part that says Parthia. You see where it says Parthia? Underneath that, write Persia. Persia is the ancient name of modern day Iran. Persia. Okay, so under Mesopotamia, right, Babylon, because that's where the Babylonian Empire was. After that, the Persians conquered them, and that is the area known as Parthia. And what happened was, when the new empire conquered the old one, they just took control of their land. It's the same as if I'm conquering PE and I come and kill you, and then I take your house. All right, and then I go to the next house and take that house. This is what happened. So they moved in, they conquered Babylon and took that territory. So every empire became a little bit bigger, a little bit bigger, a little bit bigger. All right, let me just check what comes next there. Babylon, Persia, and then after that, the Grecian Empire. Do you see where it says Macedonia? Kind of right in the middle of the map, right above Macedonia, Greece. So I'm showing you now is where these empires were in the world. All right, so we've got Babylon, we've got um, Persia, and now we've got Greece. And then the Roman Empire was that last part of the statue, and that obviously started in Rome. Do you see Rome, Italy? The Roman Empire. That's where it started. And again, all that happened was they took over the previous empire. So that's why you see currently the map that we're looking at, all the yellow part is the extent of the Roman Empire, which was quite a big area. It's the whole of Western Europe. It's right down the Middle East, Turkey, Babylon, and all the way to North Africa. All right. So the reason I'm showing you this map is because the next empire that we're waiting for, the feet and the toes, will come out of this geographical territory. Because it says, if you look at the image, you can't really see it too good, but if you look at the image, the feet and the toes come out of the Roman Empire. You see the legs of iron, the legs of the Roman Empire, the next kingdom comes from them. All right. So the reason I'm showing you the map is because this kingdom that we're waiting to come before Jesus returns will come from somewhere within that geographical area. So these 10 kings that we're speaking about are not going to come from America. They're not going to come from Russia. They're not going to come from South Africa. They're not going to come from Australia. They're going to come from one of the countries within that yellow part. You get that? So now let's turn over the page and you can guess what countries that's going to be. All right? That's a prophecy opinion. No, I'm only kidding. Let's turn over the page. So what we'll look at, this is an important map that I think you should just maybe keep some in your Bible also, because it's good to refer to this throughout all prophecy. So if you look at the map, it gives you the modern day countries. The Roman Empire consisted of mostly Western Europe. So if you look at the map, if you're familiar with Europe, you see where it says Spain, France, Italy, those countries down there by Greece, Turkey, and then Syria, Iraq, Jordan, Israel, bit of Egypt. So all of those countries I just mentioned around the Mediterranean Sea, that's part of the old Roman Empire. So the 10 kings that Daniel's talking about will come from one of those countries. 10 countries in that area will form up the next kingdom that we're waiting for. So if you look at that, you can exclude Germany, Poland, Ukraine, Russia, and basically anything else around there. All right. So what scholars of prophecy have done for many, many years is they've looked at the map and tried to pick 10 countries which they think will form part of this kingdom that will come. The honest truth is we don't know. All right. And the reason we mention in the European Union is because the first time in history since the Roman Empire, there is a unity in Europe. And when this started to happen back in 1958, the scholars of prophecy got very excited because they thought, Daniel 2 is coming true. There's finally a unity of kings inside Europe. And then there were 6 original countries in the original European Economic Community, the EEC. There were 6 countries in Western Europe that formed this. And people said, wow, this is it. We're just waiting for 4 more countries. And then it carried on. More countries came, And today we have the European Union. Just that name should say enough. It's a union of countries in the same area that Daniel's speaking about. But there's not 10. There's 28. Too many. Right? So we can't say that the European Union is the empire that Daniel's talking about, because it's not 10 kings, it's not 10 countries, it's 28. So the idea is that maybe in the future, maybe in our lifetime, something will happen in Europe. The European Union will dissolve and break up, and there will be a new union where they'll break up Europe and Africa and the Middle East into 10 regions. And those 10 regions, when that will then fulfill the prophecy of Daniel chapter 2. To this point, we don't know how that will happen or where it will happen. We don't know what 10 countries it will be. That will all be speculation. We do know for a fact that there will be 10 countries within that geographical area that will make up that last kingdom. That is a biblical fact. Anything after that, unfortunately, is pure speculation. And not even I can go as far as to say what countries. The furthest I will go is to say that I do believe it will definitely be some countries from Western Europe, because that's pretty important. And definitely has to be countries from the Middle East. Turkey has to be involved. Syria, Iraq, Israel, Egypt has to be involved. All right. So could it be 5 countries from the Middle East and 5 countries from Europe? Could be. All right. But those countries are definitely a part of the prophecy of Daniel chapter 2. So when you hear news about Europe and about the Middle East, even now with Iran and Syria and all these fightings, it's always exciting stuff because it's directly related to what we're talking about today. We are just waiting for the final stuff. To be honest with you, maybe it doesn't even happen in our lifetime. Maybe this only happens during the 7 years of tribulation. Because we know that when this happens, Jesus is going to come back. That's what Daniel says. When those kings are formed, Jesus will return. All right. So it might not even happen in our lifetime, but we'll definitely see the building blocks of this. As we have seen already, the European Union. We see things happening there. There's definitely unity in the area that Daniel's talking about. But it's not a complete fulfillment of what he's talking about. So I think we'll probably see the building blocks, but when the 10 kings are finally formed, we'll probably be raptured. That's kind of my biblical opinion. All right. And that is the first prophecy of Daniel. It gets weirder and wilder as we go along. But this is actually the easiest one of all the prophecies of Daniel. It's a simple one of a statue. The statue represents empires that will come. We know from history what those empires are. We're just waiting for the last one, the feet of iron and clay. All right, we got